Hello, everyone, and welcome to SBOM Europe Live, the second episode in this series. Today, we have a very interesting guest. Last time we were only ourselves, the hosts. Who are you, Anthony?
So hello everyone, Anthony Howson. I am from the UK. I do lots of things with SBOMs, open source, and just generally trying to educate people in how to use SBOMs effectively.
And I'm Ole Johansson. I'm from Sollentuna, just north of Stockholm in Sweden. Also a consultant and a long-time open source activist, developer, teacher, all kinds of things. So the agenda for today, while we already introduced SBOM Europe and the hosts, we're going to run a small update session. Then we're going to introduce our guest and have a fireside chat with him. We prepared some issues, but when we three speak, it's really hard to stay on track and stay focused. But we'll give it a try this time. Right, guys? We have a lot of interesting things in our heads. But after that discussion, we'll have some time for question and answers from the audience. And before closing, we just want to mention a few coming events that are interesting. So, Anthony, updates.
Okay, so the first one we want to make people aware of is FOSDEM in Brussels in the beginning of February next year. They have a dev room dedicated to SBOMs, as they have for the last couple of years. If it's like it was this year, it'll be packed with lots of very valuable information. So they're currently asking for call for papers, which I think have to be in by the end of this month. And then you'll find out if you've been selected, I think, in the middle of December. Always a great way of sharing with the community. There's also the security dev room. Ole, do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. And for those who doesn't know, FOSDEM is Europe's, above all, largest open source conference. It's where all open source people meet, but it's also where we meet part of regulators in the union. They actually came last year and were very active in both SBOM dev room and another dev room focusing on compliance issues in the EU. The security dev room has one of the topics in that room is supply chain security, and that's why I added it here. It's going to be very interesting to see what's coming there, and I'll propose a few talks in both dev rooms, as I guess both of you guys will. And in addition, I know, Philippe, you have an event the days before FOSDEM. FOSDEM is February 1 to 2nd, over the weekend.
Yes. I'm pasting that in the chat. It's a workshop the day before FOSDEM. I'm pasting the link there. There's also a bunch of other events around FOSDEM. I'm pasting the link to the site of the Open Source Europe, Forum Europe, which has created a website called Open Source Week. But on the day before FOSDEM, basically, the goal is to have open source tool developers around SCA, SBOMs, supply chain security, license compliance, and have them come and present their roadmaps to users, which will then present their requirements, or the other way around. The point is to put together users of these tools with authors of these tools so we can try to find opportunities to participate, create better tools, generate fewer bugs, and try to pair folks to work together better.
Yeah.
Great. hackathons are always important to get some focus on the standards and interoperability.
This is not a hackathon. This is really a workshop where you have two authors presenting the roadmap, users presenting the requirements.
Ah, okay.
So
Cool.
no code involved. No, just to make sure. I mean, last year we had, for instance, Alan Friedman from the CISA. We had lawyers. We had folks involved in supply chain security and tons of code authors. So it's really where you have a diverse mix of folks which are involved in, generally speaking, software supply chain, compliance, security, that come together to exchange on the tool, specifically on the tool. We're not talking policies. We're not talking any of that. We're talking tools and data.
Yeah. And we'll make sure to add the link to your event on the SBOM Europe website as well. Well, you can't have a webinar today without mentioning AI. What about it, Anthony?
So,
do you have any news?
So a couple of months ago, the SBOM Arama in the US, there was an AI workshop looking at bill of materials for AI models, data, etc. Well, Linux Foundation have just published a paper this week about AI bombs. It's heavily focused on SPDX and what SPDX is doing. But it's just to share people awareness. Cyclone DX are doing something similar. So things are moving afoot. With the EU AI Act requiring greater transparency, obviously this is becoming quite an important topic. So people, I'll add the link to the chat shortly.
Nice. And we've been discussing the Cyber Resilience Act for a long time in many different forums and webinars. We're still waiting for it to be published in the official journal of the European Union. We think that it's going to happen any day soon, and that's after all the heads of states have signed the legislation. And 20 days after that, the legislation will come into full force. And that means probably around Christmas. Isn't that exciting, Anthony? Oh, you're outside the union.
Yeah, it still applies.
Okay, so lastly, we just want to mention that we have another working group we're part of. We call the OWASP SBOM Forum. And lately, we've been focusing that forum on vulnerability management and had discussions around the MVD, the National Vulnerability Database. And despite that they're saying that they're trying, they have a full workforce and they're trying to get up to speed, they're adding the backlog for every week. There are more CVs coming that they handle per week. So we don't know if they ever will catch up, but we will see. But meanwhile, the CVE organization is really working hard to step forward and do a better job with adding proper identities from the CNAs as well as CWE and CVSS scores. So we'll see what happens there. I saw statistics that the Linux kernel is the top provider of CVEs, with WordPress coming second best. So there are things happening in this world. Okay, that's all the updates. I think we're very happy and pleased to welcome our first guest to SBOM Live webinars. Philippe, who are you really?
So I'm a co-founder of various SBOM standards. Well, not various SBOM standards, but at least I created package URL. I'm also a co-founder of SPDX and quite involved with the Cyclone DX efforts too. I'm also creating and maintaining a bunch of open source tools. And I've been psyched recently, for instance, checking some of the download stats of some of the small libraries that I maintain that I probably can boast to have several million downloads a month, and I had no idea.
Wow.
So I think open source is changing a lot. To put things in perspective, long time ago, it feels like almost another century, but it was not exactly a century. I had a widely successful project, which was an Eclipse-based IDE called Easy Eclipse. And over the span of 2 years, we managed to have 2 million downloads. And that was huge. Now, 2 million downloads, it's what utility library does on a monthly basis, a small utility library. So it just gives an idea of how important open source has become. And of course, with that, what do we do with it? How do we manage? How do we track it? That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to help to solve in a modest way.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the cool things with open source, that you have one idea when you write them and release them, and someone catches on and it's used in places you had no idea, and in circumstances that either make you very happy or very sad, but you have no control over the destiny. And I think that's kind of cool and amazing. But Philippe, you mentioned briefly all the things you do, but how did you come into the world of SPDX, SBOMs, and all of this? Where did it all start?
Roughly around 2007-ish. At the time, I was building IDEs based on Eclipse and NetBeans, open source distribution of these, and a small service business to create custom SDKs and IDE tool suite for commercial software vendors as open source and based on open source. And in doing so, we started to aggregate many different plugins in the tool chain, sometimes 10, hundreds. And there was a simple problem, which was each of these plugins were themselves embedding many other libraries. And we wanted to make sure we could maintain, manage, track, for instance, on the license side, where all these plugins came from. And literally, we were doing what you can see today done by JetBrains, where we had a range of very specialized IDEs, one for Java, one for Java Enterprise, one for JavaScript, one for this and that and that. So there was like 10 different editions. And very quickly, we started to say, well, we have a problem. We need to track all these plugins origin license, eventually security issues, updates, and so on. And at some point of time, at that time, few folks came to us and said, hey, you guys seem to know a few things about software and software origin and open source. We are buying these software companies. Can you tell us if there's any third-party code in it? And I said, I don't know a thing about it, but I have a great tool for that. That's called grep. We'll do it.
Yeah, it's a good tool.
Yeah. And one of these customers was a company called Motorola, US company at the time. Now they went through a lot of corporate reorganization, but they were quite active at the Linux Foundation. And the lawyer there, a guy called Esteban Rocket, wanted to do something to help sort out a bit the mess of the origin of all the software these teams were acquiring from vendors, from open source project, from company acquisitions, and that's where SPDX started. And so my partner at the company called Michael Herzog actually came with the name SPDX, and then we transferred it to the Linux Foundation afterwards, which really meant software package data exchange.
Yep.
And I think there's a bit of history writing that happens as always. So I think they've changed the name to System.
It's
Yeah.
always it's always interesting working out where these acronyms in our world of technology come from. Yeah, but yeah, I think you're right. Software, I think it's now more than software we need to think about now. It's all about systems.
Yeah.
Which probably brings you on to sort of now in terms of, well, SBOMs, in terms of obviously 2007, SBOMs probably didn't, well, the term SBOM probably didn't exist.
We called them bombs at the time, and they were literally Excel spreadsheets.
Yes. So in terms of that, looking from there to where we are now, how do you think the usage of SBOMs is going? And do you think it's recognised that SBOMs need to be used a lot more to address those sort of questions?
So, well, like everything, there's that's great that it's being embraced, but there's a bit of hype going on. There's an explosion of different formats, and even if it's not a lot, I was yesterday evening trying to resolve a bug we have in our vulnerability database, and we have a parsing bug when we parse vulnerabilities served by Red Hat. And Red Hat recently announced that they were embracing a new data format called OSV, originated by Google at the Linux OpenSSF. But basically, they serve advisory data that are centered around the vulnerability and related to software packages in CVRF 1, 1.2, 2.0, OSV, a CVE format of their own, CSAF, CSAF2, and yet another format that I forgot. But all of a sudden, your head is exploding. But I've already listed 7 formats, some of them which are being deprecated, some of them are not. And each of them being subtly different. Oh, they also released the SPDX SBOMs also, again, to add. And all of them being subtly different and subtly similar. But the differences are devilish, of course. So it's very symptomatic of the problem we have. There's an explosion. I think it's a sane and good thing. It will have at some point of time to converge to fewer formats and fewer variety, because right now I don't think it's helpful if I'm on the receiving end, even as a sophisticated user who knows how to make sense of all these different formats. It's a total mess.
Do you think we've been focusing too much on format and less on content? Because I think it's the content that seems to be more important, and the format is just a delivery.
Yes.
And I think there's been too much emphasis on the format, and as you say, there's multiple formats now that people are having to support.
There's probably too much emphasis on the format, which in all honesty is as interesting as the shade of white on which you will write a poem, right? It doesn't matter. The piece of paper you're writing the poem on doesn't matter. It's completely secondary to the topic. There's that. I think there's another thing when you were talking about AI bombs. I feel also in some cases where, as we say in the US, I'm both French and American, by the way, jumping the shark, which is in reference to Happy Days TV series episode where to rekindle the series interest, they had the main character Fonzie on water ski jumping over a shark, which it became an expression. So it's when you're trying to do too much about it. I wonder if putting SBOM on everything and calling that AI SBOM is the right thing. I think, for instance, in AI, the thing that matters would be to have the reference content that's used to train the models.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm Google. I'm training Google Gemini on the internet. How do I attribute that? Right? How do I track the origin of the internet? There's a lot of difficult issues. Another interesting one is hardware bombs, because remember that bill of materials is something that originated in hardware,
Yes.
not software. And we called hardware SBOM as a weird ring to it to me.
Yes.
Yeah, but it all fits together really. But I kind of like that attitude that the file isn't the interesting part, it's the data and what we do with it.
Yeah.
And are we there really? Are we doing things with SBOMs?
So I completed a study for a large industrial company with a bunch of folks in my team about a month plus ago. The company in question has thousands and thousands of software developers. Each of the software teams went out on their own to buy commercial products for software composition analysis and SBOMs. And guess what? Each team bought or used a different product, which at the scale of a company is not exactly a happy event. If anything, from an economic standpoint, it sucks. And they wanted to find a way with data to say to each of these software teams, hey, guys, these tools are not the best. You should use open source. That was the impetus going in. And with a lot of hubris, I says, yeah, that's going to be easy. Just ask each of these vendors to provide us an SBOM. Your standard is Cyclone DX. Get an SBOM, ideally 1.4. If it's 1.5 or 1.6, we'll be okay. We're just going to feed that in scan code and Deja code, and we're going to do a comparison. We'll be done in a minute. and of course, it didn't work out exactly like that. It was a total mess. It was difficult actually for each of these vendors to eventually produce a Cyclone DX SBOM that was correct. We were getting things which were invalid JSON, not schema valid, and the data inside was not comparing apples to orange. It was literally comparing apples to cars and banana to kangaroos. And especially the key information for us was to use package URL, which is a small standard that I created, which I'm very proud of. But I cried when I looked at the results because everybody is inventing their own PURLs. And these PURLs may be okay for use within the confine of a software vendor ecosystem. Because if you create, say, a PURL and you stuff a UID or SHA-1 in it, and that's it. If you can make sense of that in your ecosystem and your vulnerability database for vulnerability management, that works. And you can say, oh, I'm using a PURL. Except in practice, you cannot share that with anyone. So we've seen PURL stuff with CPs, made up package types. And that's just on the surface. If you dive deeper, if you see, for instance, a Red Hat container-based image, it doesn't make sense to see a Debian package reported in depth. It's possible. I can create a Debian and Red Hat mix image, but nobody does that, especially not Red Hat. And
did I really hear you mention package URLs with CPEs embedded?
Yes.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah,
but you talk here about the problems within a large software development organizations, right? But if we look across the software supply chain, if this is the state that the SBOMs generated are so bad, how will this work and when will this work? What do we need to make it work across the supply chain? Because that will be needed by the coming regulations or already with an NIS2 regulation in Europe.
Yeah, so that's the key issue today is, frankly, if you don't have valid data coming through your supply chain, there's no way you can do automation.
No.
If you don't automate, there's no way you can handle the volume of package and package vulnerabilities and licensing issues that may occur at scale. Because as we all know, you can create a container-based app written in JavaScript with NPMs and assemble 5,000 package in a snap like that.
Yeah.
Right. Once you have that, you will be exposed on a daily basis to updates, security issues, license issues. And that's just on one app. A large company may have the luxury to buy all the different tools on the market and and check it and have a large dedicated team to handle these. Small and medium company will never be able to do that.
Nope.
That's completely prohibitive at scale. So there's that's really I'm ringing the alarm there. There's really something that needs to be done and done reasonably swiftly. And I have a few ideas how we can help at scale, but right now it's really a mess.
So the software supply chain affects everybody, whether they're small or large organizations, and everybody needs to have some understanding. So next question, Ole, was there's the next question there. So one of the things is, and it really goes back to what your original things in 2007 is, you wanted to find out what components you had. I think you've alluded a little bit about we're talking about your recent work. Where do you think we are? Why do you think discovering your components is so hard? And really, we're thinking about components, not just open source. We obviously proprietary software is there as well. We have to think about that. So why do you think it's hard? And where are we?
It's a bit of an inflicted wound in a way. I mean, the success of assembling software with open source means that you can pull together a wonderful app in a matter of hours. And there's no easy way then to track accurately everything that you include. You can copy paste code and then you have to see how this is compounded across not you but the providers of the software and the open source software you use, which are doing the same and have also their own supply chain. So it's difficult to discover that. The approach has traditionally been, let's provide some metadata. And so we call these manifests, for instance, a package.json for NPM or a cargo.toml for Rust, are supposed to contain accurate, summarized metadata that describe what is this package about, where it's coming from, what is the license, eventually implicitly what is its type. If it's a cargo.toml, it has to be written in Rust, most likely. And most everyone relies on this metadata, but the problem is these metadata are not super accurate. There's no real standard approach, say on the package registry, to enforce accuracy and correctness of this metadata.
But I strongly agree with you here, but I also see many scanners that rely solely on the package manifest and miss the fact that in my Docker container, I copy 3 binaries and 4 libraries in binary form. So when they do what they call scanning, they don't scan. They just say what they installed, basically.
And it's eventually something which is both poorly done and reasonably easy. If you're looking at an Alpine base installation container image, you have a file which contains an index of all the installed packages and a bunch of other files which tell you for each package what are the files that were installed, that you can eventually compare upstream with what was released and published by Alpine. Yeah. But that's not the important and interesting part, because that's the part that's eventually documented by this manifest. All the application payload that comes on top, it's eventually just completely ad hoc and shooting darts. Take something like a .NET payload. And we
Yep.
see more and more .NET used on Linux deployment, for instance. It's one of the ecosystem that has the poorest quality of metadata overall in terms of origin license. Figuring out where is the source code of Nugget .NET package is a problem. There's a mismatch of Microsoft provided code that comes from random binaries distributed by Microsoft plus random build binaries in Nugget.
Yeah, and the .NET runtime for Linux contains so much, and it's really hard to get an overview over what's needed and where it comes from. I bet in the runtime they have tons of open source as well.
Yeah, and when you deploy that as an app, you've lost all this poor metadata is gone, so it's even worse.
Yeah,
you have poor metadata going in. You build an application that you deploy either in a SaaS mode or redistribute as an app, and this is completely depleted from any metadata. And so poor metadata, no metadata, incorrect metadata more often than not, missing things like common case, well, not super common, but it exists. Say you have a Maven jar in Java that can embed other jars. It's called an Uber jar or a mega jar or a fat jar. And what this means literally is that you're vendoring and bundling into that one package, which is a zip, multiple other zip, which may eventually be slightly updated, adapted. 99.99% of the tools just completely ignore this.
And I mean, it's very much like Python packages that can include C binaries and other things.
Yeah, or Rust binaries for that matter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the problem is that to me there's two ways. Eventually we need to instrument all the build tool chains so we have a better understanding at build time what goes into these. Ideally, this should be also embedded into the packages. Until we can achieve this and we have reproducible build, we are left to trying to reverse engineer backwards and figure out what goes into these binaries, which is not a perfect solution, but that's the least worst solution to help us figure out what's in it. The other thing is that if we have correct data in, we have a better chance to get correct data out. Yep. What I mean by that, for instance, all these incorrect PURLs I saw in this small study, which by the way, I'll be able to release probably in a week. I just got legal clearing from the company to actually be able to release a sanitized version. So it's going to be interesting. There won't be any vendor names there. It's not, the point is not to shame the vendors. The point is to have raise the awareness that there's a real problem of the quality of discovery. And so if you think about solution, the whole idea of package.url was to have a distributed, decentralized, no authority approach where you can come with a PURL and it should be so simple and obvious that I will come with the same PURL for the same package. That was the idea. That's the idea. But in practice, if anyone invents anything, we need to put together an index and a list, basically, of all the known package URLs that, whether you're an open source vendor or commercial vendor, you can use as a reference and ensure at least that you don't publish too much crap out. Or if you're a consumer of the output of these tools, you can say, hey, your stuff doesn't work. Go back to the drawing board and send me an SBOM with the correct content. And I think that's probably going to be part of the solution is to have the users, push back on the tool authors and the vendors provide reference data that are shared for everyone to reuse. Eventually building benchmarks so we have a way for new tools to come and learn from the wisdom of other tools if need be.
So, I mean, you mentioned various things about metadata.
Yes.
Now, and if you think about the way SBOMs have been developed over the last 5 years, essentially they need metadata. So do you think the ecosystems need to actually step up a bit more to actually allow their data to be good sources of trusted metadata that can be captured in an SBOM, or is there something else that's going on there?
No,
you know,
I think
where does the ownership and accountability live?
So having better metadata is the way out, and leveraging each package ecosystem so that it can be applied to a whole swath of package at once, I think is going to be the way. As an example, take Rust, which is fairly fresh in the cohort of package managers. When you download a crate from crates.io, which is the canonical public repository for open source Rust packages, you may have inside not the same original metadata file that was published by the author. Literally, the cargo toml file is going to be kept renamed to .org. And there's going to be a normalized version that's been produced by the crates.io backend that's replacing the one. They do small touch-ups. It's not intrusive. But for instance, there used to be a convention in the Rust ecosystem to say Apache and MIT, or Apache/MIT, or ASL/MIT are the license of this package. And there's tons of variation of that. And really what this means, it's under choice of Apache 2.0 or MIT license. They do this kind of small normalization in some case, which helps a lot. So that's one example where you can see positive impact at scale, because literally they applied that to all the crates, meaning that a small ambiguity that's been letting everybody scratch their head for years can potentially be resolved positively. So doing that is one thing. The other thing is beyond metadata, I think we need to go back to something that helps to efficiently match code, meaning being able to identify code based on its content. And that can be as simple in some cases as a checksum. The difficulty is that checksums are brittle. If you have one bit of difference, you'll get a different checksum. Signatures, for the same reason, are extremely brittle because you may not be able to get the same outcome and the signature won't match or may not get the same result because signature is essentially based on the better version of checksums, but conceptually fundamentally similar. There used to be tools that were doing approximate content matching. There's still some tool around that, like Black Duck Protex or FOSS-ID or ScanOSS. I think they're interesting but legacy in their approach because they're focusing on the wrong problem. But we still need to have something which is not as strong as an exact checksum or signature. And I don't care for fragments or snippets of code. It's not super interesting, especially from an overall supply chain point of view. There's use case for that, but that's not the primary use case. And being able to identify still approximately code based on this content would help a lot. In practice, the few tools that are able to do this were in general faring much better in their ability to discover code, and especially discover payload, say, in an image, the application payload, which is not the third-party code or third-party code that's been vendored. There's another domain where we are in dire need of a solution is I wouldn't call that legacy because that's not legacy, but everything that's C and C++ that's used in embedded device typically, but not only, where there's no metadata. There's no package manager, right? There's been some attempt like Conan to provide some level of that. There's some VC++ package initiative from Microsoft also similar, but they've not caught up. And so there's a practical problem where code is often being copied, vendored, reused, modified slightly, and then included in an embedded device.
Yeah.
How do you figure out? And especially these embedded device very often will not be something that you can easily update over the air. And how do you communicate that there's a serious vulnerability issues here where somebody can take over your coffee machine and wreak havoc on your private life with that?
So I think.
Well,
Go on,
yeah. Moving on here, this is interesting when you talk about embedded devices, because in the union we're getting regulation now that will enforce providers to be more transparent. Do you think regulation will move all our work forward with software transparency and so on? What's your take here?
I think it helps. It brings some level of visibility, but as far as I can see, either during my lifetime or previous lives where software has been written, I've not seen much impact of regulations on the way we write software. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I don't know of any. So I think it's important. I think it's not so much the way we write software that's going to change in as much as the way executives in companies that consume and or produce products that have software will consider the problem of security. So I think that's more important. I hope it won't have too much of an impact on how we write software. I can see, though, in a few highly regulated environments that do safety critical software, where people can die, say medical device or car, automotive. It feels when I discuss with some of the people writing code in this context, there's so much red tape already. They're probably way above the requirements of the CRA. But the question is, at what time the regulations, the red tape, the standards become part of, generally speaking, the work prevention department, where we no longer write software anymore, but
it could get to the stage where the regulation inhibits innovation, because and I think what the regulation is requiring is more transparency. Actually, is going to force industry to respond in a particular way to allow that to be enabled, but so it becomes less of a burden for the product developers. That's what I hope will happen. So the issues you described in the last 20 minutes, I think, are things that have to get solved or will have a solution to support this growing need. So yes.
Yeah, I hope so. In any case, there's one thing positive about the regulation, whether it's the regulation in the US or in Europe, and also emerging regulations in other parts of the world, such as Australia, the UK, or India, to name a few, is that it brings the spotlight on a topic that's not super fun. I like to say, the F in compliance is for fun. So I think regulation is a good, it's a sting that stimulates. And that's good in that sense. I hope it won't go too far to the point, again, to restrict innovation. In any case, it stimulates innovation in our field for sure. And that's a bit a bit of a problem, by the way, because there's a really gold rush mentality on many of the vendors in the field,
Yep.
which are basically just putting a suit on and a bit of lipstick on existing open source tools and libraries and reselling that and claiming that they've solved every problem. That was actually a surprise when we did this story where it says, this is really weird. The output and the bugs in this commercial tool really look like the bugs in this open source tool that I know. And
those are exciting moments when you get a device to test and you recognize that, well, this is my own software within this device.
Yeah,
I recognize the behavior and the error codes.
Yeah. In this case, that was not code I wrote, but a little bit of binary analysis showed me that it was effectively exactly the same code.
Yep.
It was not disclosed actually, but again, that's not for me to play the Zorro and the to be self-righteous there. The point is that's problematic because you have a lot of this open washing of open source solution, and of course these are backed by large commercial sales force, and eventually customers will buy things they would be able to get for free, or they will buy crap which they shouldn't have been buying in the first place, but they'll get this warm and fuzzy feeling that they've done something about the problem.
So I think this brings us on to sort of to wrap things up. I think there's lots of issues. There are potential solutions. How can a community in Europe help to solve the problems together rather than it being fragmented? I think we have an opportunity because Europe is going to need a solution. How can we work together to move forward and help each other? And that's just briefly because I think we want to just ask you to get a few questions from the audience.
Yeah. So very quickly, take a practical example. You said we have a somewhat of a debacle with the National Vulnerability Database in the US.
Yep.
Which is not fulfilling its obligations, except it has no obligations to anyone. The concept of a centralized bug database that the NVD is completely backward. The ability to have a database that receives vulnerabilities and you don't know which software exactly it is for is nuts. This is really what happens today, right? We have CVEs that are fed to the NVD without proper tagging with what they call the CP, which is the software identifier for that. I mean, the bug was identified in the first place on a piece of software which was very well known. And there's this dilution in looking at things backward by vulnerability as being the major identifier. We need to switch things by package. Software package is what we use and consume, and that's what we need to have as a major. And you don't see many databases actually doing that. Even OSV, for instance, which is a recent addition, is centered on vulnerabilities. GitHub Advisories is also centered on security issues. Security issues don't matter. What matters is the software that I use out of date, not properly licensed for my policy and my taste? Does it have security bugs? But not, is there a security bug here? Does it apply to me? No, that's nonsense. Unless of course you're like the proverbial Dilbert's pointy boss, which read in a magazine, oh, there's this log4shell vulnerability. Do we have it? That's the use case. That's an important use case. We should not ignore it. But it eventually is the main use case of this. We need to create and focus on data and do that leveraging whole ecosystem at once and pool our efforts to review and create faulty, crappy data, which is without correct data at scale, no automation is possible.
And I think that probably fits in very nicely with what your event that you're having just before FOSDEM. That's the sort of thing that the sort of challenges that people in that room are going to wrestle with. So I think that's a good segue into that. So that's really useful insights there, Philippe. Just looking at one of the questions that came through, it's following on from the SBOM report that I have put on the link from the Linux Foundation, and then someone has come back and said, well, there's also one from Cyclone DX. Yes, there is. In the summer, I had a student working for me, and we looked at trying to create an ML bomb following the Cyclone DX using an AI model in Hugging Face. Could we source a minimum set of information to populate a Cyclone DX ML bomb? And we very quickly came to the conclusion was no, the data's not there, which is just another example of the sort of the metadata problem that Philippe's been referring to about software. So yes, AI bombs has a lot more metadata. It's not there. Hopefully we can share that and get people to start populating the data to allow us to build good bill of materials, because that's what we're going to need to do. So if people using AI in their decision-making processes, we can understand a little bit more about the pedigree of the training data, etc. So I think it's quite AI bombs is just a bigger problem. Let's sort software out today, next week for AI. So,
but we are still in this week. Do you have any questions from the audience to Philippe? Please turn on your microphones and your video if you want to be on the video. Or post them in the chat.
If you're shy. Yeah, just while we wait for questions, I was saying we should and we must. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but
no.
I do have a question.
I was doing a bit of dogs and pony
right, okay,
dancing to fill in the void, filling the blanks. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I really want to thank you for all the excellent software that you have created and provided, because we use quite a lot of it in our company, especially scan code we've been using for a long time,
cool.
But also other tools that you've written. So, and now we're looking into using PURL DB.
Yes.
And like I did some testing. There is like some kind of test database called public PURL DB IO or something.
Yes.
I would like to. I'm wondering about that one. Is it who maintains it and who owns it and so on and so forth?
That's a serious problem when you have to share data. So basically, just so everyone to understand, PearlDB is a database of package metadata that aggregates and normalizes the data of all the package registries and repositories. It's eventually a lot of packages, and the difficulty is how do you make this data publicly available? So we did put a public instance. And of course, you have questions like that. Who owns this data? How do I use that? And how do I get the whole thing, for instance, offline for me to use? And there's no easy answer, except we have a project to address just this, which is called federated code. And the idea is to say we need to put the data such that scan code scans, but CDXGen scans, Anthony's SBOM scans can all be published, eventually versions, in a constellation of Git repositories with a simple way, kit by Perl, that makes you address this metadata and the data we could have created in the PearlDB. So you could aggregate that in your own instance or in any other systems. So we can send out an email. I can discuss that more in details. But the whole point of being able to share data is a problem. To me, the data issue is so problematic Conceptually, I'm not a communist, but I don't think the data about free and open source software should be proprietary. That just doesn't make sense.
No.
Free and open source software data and metadata should be free and open source itself. Right now, we've eventually let vendors that sell proprietary metadata about open source, they conceptually are no different than selling exploit on the darknet. What's the difference between somebody that tells you, oh, I have these very private proprietary data about vulnerabilities in open source code that only I have access to, that I'm going to sell you for subscription, versus, oh, I have this wonderful zero-day exploit that I can sell you for a fee if you want to use it for good measure. That there's no fundamental difference. So that's the long story. The short story is sharing the data is not easy. I think we have a solution to help with this. The difficulty, as always, is everybody wants data, but no one wants to pay for it. There's real work that's required to do all this, and helping share the load there is always welcome. I'm not specifically speaking for me, but for any of the tools in the space. Coming together so we can have data that benefits everyone is essential. Just saying, hey, let's build it doesn't work. We need to actually do the work.
Absolutely. And I know that Dependency Track is looking into finding ways of actually distributing vulnerability data. But talking about open source, we had another question in the chat, and I think we have to end there. What's your most urgent call to actions for open source tooling and ecosystem developers and communities?
Data, isn't it?
That's data and data.
Good quality data.
If you think about SBOM, for instance,
yep,
and Cyclone DX versus SPDX or VEX formats with CSAF, OpenVEX, Cyclone DX, and maybe SPDX also coming to the fray. If you have common identifiers, meaning you have a package URL for a package that everybody can understand and make sense of, an SPDX license expression that everybody can make sense of, and a vulnerability identifier like a CVE that everybody can make sense of, you have a common language. It doesn't matter in the end which tool or which SBOM standard you use, if we agree on correct identifiers. That's the key. So my call to action would be to say, really, if you're creating tools, make sure you use data that can be consumed by the other tools around you. If you are consuming tools, whether it's open source or proprietary commercial tools, help the open source project or demand from your commercial vendors that they create data that are interoperable and that you can use, because there's no one tool that can solve all the issues, even if I wish mine were, but that's not the case. So there's no one tool. We are going to have to use different tools. There's going to be better mousetrap built every other day. If we can agree on common identifiers, again, CVE, which is already pretty much a done deal, but not always, because of the proprietary vulnerability database, package URLs, and SPDX license expression. With these three, you have a strong, simple way to describe pretty much everything. I've made a stupid my own SBOM standards because everybody needs another SBOM standards. There's not enough of them. It was more of a tongue-in-cheek, which I called it the KissBOM.
Oh,
yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
So the idea there is to say you could have eventually enough usable information about SBOM content just using a list of package identifier, in this case PURLs. And it's a bit of a tongue in cheek, it's provocative, but think about it. In some case, maybe that's all you really need. And you better have this right first before being able to do any kind of more complex things.
We're conscious of the time. We're just past the hour. So
Yep.
thank you, Philippe. Thank you for your very insightful.
Moving to a close here, talking about discovery and automation and standards, we have a webinar next week on the OWASP Transparency Exchange API, which will be very important. You have the link there, and it's free, of course. Coming up is the OWASP Benelux Days and the FOSDEM. Remember, call for papers are out now. So it's time to think about what you can do to present. FOSDEM is, of course, an open source conference that's free of charge, but they kindly ask you to buy a t-shirt to help with the costs. So I have a lot of t-shirts back here. The next SBOM Live will be in December. We haven't set the exact date yet, but we have the guest, Johanna Parika Altenstedt. She's a lawyer working with these kind of issues. We're going to have a very interesting discussion. She had a very nice talk at the Nordic Software Security Summit here in September in Stockholm. So we're looking forward to have Johanna as our guest next time. And with that, thank you, Philippe. And Anthony, do you have any last words to the audience?
No, thank you. Thank you.